Word of Mouth is an adult story time presented by the Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. New stories are presented every month on the second Sunday at 2:30 p.m. As a reminder, these stories contain adult content and language. It is recommended to review these stories before allowing younger audiences to listen. Hello, my name is Patrick Cutler, and I'm a librarian too here at Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. And today we'll be reading Neil Gaiman's book, Stardust. Let's begin. We'll begin with the song. Go and catch a falling star. Get with child a mandrake root. Tell me where all past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear mermaids singing, or to keep off envy's stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. If thou be guest born to strange sights, things invisible to see, ride 10,000 days and nights, till age snow white hair on thee. Thou, when thou returns, wilt tell me all strange wonders that befell thee, and swear nowhere lives a woman true and fair. If thou find one, let me know. Such a pilgrimages were sweet. Yet do not, I would not go. Through it at next door we might meet. Though she were true when you met her, at last till you write your letter, yet she will be false ere I come to 2 or 3. John Donne, 1572 to 1631. Chapter 1, in which we learn of the village of Wall and the curious things that occur there every 9 years. There once was a young man who wished to gain his heart's desire. And while that is, as beginnings go, not entirely novel, for every tale about every young man there ever was or will be could start in a similar manner. There was much about this young man and what happened to him that was unusual, although even he never knew the whole of it. The tale started, as many tales have started, in Wall. The town of Wall stands today as it has stood for 600 years, on a high jut of granite amidst a small forest woodland. The houses of Wall are square and old, built of gray stone with dark slate roofs and high chimneys. Taking advantage of every inch of space on the rock, the house leans into each other, are built one upon the next, with here and there a bush or tree growing out of the side of a building. There is one road from Wall, a winding track rising sharply up from the forest, where it is lined with rocks and small stones. Followed far enough south out of the forest, the track becomes a real road, paved with asphalt. Followed further, the road gets larger and is packed at all hours with cars and trucks, rushing from city to city. Eventually the road takes you to London, but London is a whole night's drive from Wall. The inhabitants of Wall are taciturn breed, falling into 2 distinct types. The native Wall folk, as gray and tall and stocky as the granite outcrop their town was built upon, and the others, who made Wall their home over the years, and their descendants. Below Wall are on the west is the forest. To the south is a treacherously placid lake served by the stream that drops from the hill behind Wall to the south. There are fields upon the hill on which sheep graze. To the east is more woodland. Immediately to the east of Wall is a high gray rock wall, from which the town takes its name. The wall is old, built of rough, square lumps of hewn granite, and it comes from the woods and goes back to the woods once more. There is only one break in the wall, an opening about 6 feet in width, and a little to the north of the village. Through the gap in the wall can be seen a large green meadow. Behind the meadow, a stream, and beyond the stream, there are trees. From time to time, shapes and figures can be seen amongst the trees in the distance. Huge shapes and odd shapes, and small, glittering things which flash and glitter at once. Although it is perfectly good meadow land, none of the villagers have ever grazed an animal on the meadow on the other side of the wall, nor have they used it for growing crops. Instead, for hundreds of, perhaps thousands of years, they have posted guards on each side of the opening of the wall, and done their best to put it out of their minds. Even today, 2 townsmen stand on either side of the opening, night and day, taking 8-hour shifts. They carry hefty wooden cudgels. They flank the opening of the town's side. Their main function is to prevent the town's children from going through the opening to the meadow and beyond. Occasionally, they are called upon to discourage a solitary rambler, or one of the few visitors from the town going through the gateway. The children they discourage simply with a display of the cudgels. Where ramblers and visitors are concerned, they are more inventive, only using physical force as a last resort. If tales of new planted grass or dangerous bull on the loose are not sufficient. Very rarely someone comes to wall knowing what they are looking for, and these people will sometimes be allowed through. There is a look in their eye, and once seen it cannot be mistaken. There have been no cases of smuggling across the wall in all the 20th century. The townsfolk know of, and they pride themselves on this. The guard is relaxed once every 9 years, on May Day, when the fair comes to the meadow. The events that follow transpired many years ago. Queen Victoria was on the throne of England, but she was not yet the black-clad widow of Windsor. She had apples in her cheeks and a spring in her step. And Lord Melbourne often had cause to upbraid gently the young queen for her flightiness. She was as yet unmarried, although she was very much in love. Mr. Charles Dickens was serializing his novel Oliver Twist. Mr. Drapier had just taken the first photograph of the moon, freezing her pale face on cold paper. Mr. Morse had recently announced a way of transmitting messages down metal wires. Had you mentioned magic or fairy to any of them, they would have simply smiled at you disdainfully. Perhaps except for Mr. Dickens. At the time, a young man and beardless, he would have looked at you wistfully. People were coming to the British Isles that spring. They came in ones and they came in twos. And they landed at Dover or in London or in Liverpool. Men and women with skins as pale as paper, skins as dark as volcanic rock, skins the color of cinnamon, speaking a multitude of tongues. They arrived all through April, and they traveled by steam train, by horse, by caravan or cart. And many of them walked. At the time, Dustin Thorne was 18, and he was not a romantic. He had nut-brown hair and nut-brown eyes, and nut-brown freckles. He was middling tall and slow of speech. He had an easy smile which illuminated his face from within. And he dreamed, when he dreamed in his father's meadow of leaving the village of Wall and all its unpredictable charm and going to London or Edinburgh or Dublin or some great town where nothing was dependent on which way the wind was blowing. He worked on his father's farm and owned nothing, save a small cottage in a far field, given to him by his parents. Visitors were coming to Wall that April for the fair, and Dustin resented them. Mr. Bromeo's Inn, the 7th Magpie, normally a warren of empty rooms, had filled a week earlier, and now the strangers had begun to take rooms in the farms and private houses, paying for their lodging with strange coin, with herbs and spice, and even with gemstones. As the day of the fair approached, the atmosphere of anticipated mountain and as the fair approached, the atmosphere of anticipation mounted. People were waking earlier, counting days, counting minutes. The guards on the gate at the sides of the wall were restive and nervous. Figures and shadows moved in the streets at the edge of the meadow. In the seventh magpie, Bridget Comfrey, who was widely regarded as the most beautiful pot girl in living memory, was provoking friction between Tommy Forrester, with whom she had been seen to step out over the previous year, and a huge man with dark eyes and a small, chittering monkey. The man spoke in English, but he had smiled expressively whenever Bridget came by. In the pub's tap room, the regulars sat in awkward proximity to the visitors, speaking so. "It's only every 9 years. They say in the old days it was every year, at midsummer." "Ask Mr. Bromios, he'll know." Mr. Bromios was tall, and his skin was olive. His black hair was curled tightly on his head. His eyes were green. As the girls of the village became women, they took notice of Mr. Bromios, but he did not return their notice. It was said he had come to the village quite some time ago, a visitor. But he had stayed in the village, and his wine was good, so the locals agreed. A loud argument broke out in the public lounge between Tommy Fester and the dark-eyed man, whose name appeared to be Alambe. "Stop them! In the name of heaven, stop them!" shouted Bridget. They're going out back to fight over me." She tossed her head prettily to the light of the oil lamps, caught her perfect golden curls. Nobody moved to stop the men, although a number of people, villagers and newcomers alike, went outside to spectate. Tommy Forrester removed his shirt and raised his fist in front of him. The strangers laughed and spat into the grass. Then he seized Tommy's right hand and sent him flying onto the ground, chin first. Tommy clambered to his feet and ran at the strangers. He landed a glancing blow on the man's cheek before finding himself face down in the dirt, his face being slammed into the mud with the wind knocked out of him. Alambe sat on the top of him and chuckled and said something in Arabic. That quickly and that easily the fight was over. Alambe climbed off Tommy Forrester, and he strutted over to Bridget Comfrey, bowed low to her, and grinned with gleaming teeth. Bridget ignored him and ran to Tommy. "Why, whatever has he done to you, my sweet?" she asked, and mopped the mud from his face with her apron and called him all manners of endearment. Alambe went with the spectators back into the public room at the end. He graciously brought Tommy Foster a bottle of Mr. Bromios' Chablis. When Tommy returned, neither of them was quite certain who had won, who had lost. Justin Thorne was not in the seventh magpie that evening. He was a practical lad who had for the last 6 months been courting Daisy Hemstock, a young woman of similar practicality. They would walk on fair evenings around the village and discuss the theory of crop rotation and the weather, on other such sensible matters, and on these walks, upon which they were invariably accompanied by Daisy's mother and younger sister, walking a healthy 6 paces behind them, they would from time to time stare at each other lovingly. At the door to the Hemstocks, Dustin would pause and bow and take his farewell. And Daisy Hemstock would walk into her house and remove her bonnet and say, "I do so wish Mr. Thorne would make up his mind to propose. I'm sure Papa would not be averse to it." "Indeed, I am sure he would not," said Daisy's mamma on this evening, as she said on every such evening, and she removed her own bonnet and her gloves and led her daughters to the drawing room, in which a very tall gentleman with a very long black beard was sitting, sorting through his pack. Daisy and her mamma and her sister bobbed curtsies to the gentleman, who spoke very little English and had arrived a few days before. A temporary lodger, in his turn, stood and bowed to them, and returned to his pack of wooden oddments, sorting and arranging and polishing. It was the chilly that April with the awkward change ability to English spring. The visitors came up the narrow road through the forest from the south. They filled the sparse rooms. They bunked out in cowbars, byres, and barns. Some of them raised colored tents. Some of them arrived in their own caravans drawn by huge gray horses, or by small shaggy ponies. In the forest there was carpets of bluebells. On the morning of April 29th, Dustin Thorne drew guard duty on the gap in the wall with Tommy Forrester. They stood out on each side of the gap in the wall, and they waited. Dustin had done guard duty many times, but here too his task had consisted of simply standing and on occasion shooing away children. Today he felt important. He had a wooden cudgel, and each stranger to the village came up to the break in the wall. Dustin or Tommy would say, "Tomorrow, tomorrow. No one's coming through today, good sirs." And the strangers would retreat a little way and stare through the break in the wall at the unassuming meadow beyond it, at the unexceptional tree that dotted through the meadow, at the rather dull forest behind it. Some of them attempted to strike up conversations with Dustin or Tommy, but the young men, proud of their status as guards, declined to converse, contenting themselves by raising their heads, tightening their lips, and generally looking important. At lunchtime, Daisy Hemstock brought by a small pot of shepherd's pie for them both, and Bridget Comfrey brought to them a mug of spiced ale. And at twilight, another two able-bodied young men of the village arrived to relieve them, carrying a lantern each, and Tommy and Dustin walked down to the inn, where Mr. Bromios gave each of them a mug of his best ale. And his best ale was very fine indeed. As a reward for doing guard duty, there was buzz of excitement in the inn, now crowded beyond believing. It was filled with visitors to the village, from every nation in the world, or so it seemed to Dustin, who had no sense of distance beyond the woods that surrounded the village of Wall. So he regarded the tall gentleman in the black top hat at the table beside him, all the way up from London, with as much as awe as he regarded the taller ebony-colored gentleman in the white one-piece robe with whom he was dining. Dustin knew that it was rude to stare, and that, as a villager of Wall, he had every right to feel superior to all of the foreigners. But he could smell unfamiliar spices on the air, and hear men and women speaking to each other in hundreds of tongues, and he gawked and gazed unashamedly. The man in the black silk top hat noticed that Dustin was staring at him and motioned the lad over to him. "Do you like treacle pudding?" he asked abruptly, by the way of introduction. Mutanabe was called away, and there was more pudding here than a man can manage on his own. Dustin nodded. The treacle pudding was steaming invitingly on its plate. "Well then," said his new friend, "help yourself." He passed Dustin a clean china bowl and a spoon. Dustin nodded, no further encouragement needed, and he began to demolish the pudding. "Now, young'un," said the tall gentleman in the black silk top hat to Dustin, once their bowls of pudding plate were quite empty, "it seems that the inn has no more rooms. Also, that every room in the village has already been let." "Is that so?" Dustin said, unsurprised. "That it is," said the gentleman in the top hat. "And what I was wondering was, would you know of a house that might have a room?" Dustin shrugged. "All the rooms have gone by now," he said. I remember that when I was a boy of 9, my mother and father sent me to sleep out in the rafters of the cow byre for a week, and let my room to a lady from the Orient, and her family and servants. She left me a kite as a thank you, and I flew it from the meadow until one day it snapped its string and flew away into the sky. Where do you live now? Asked the gentleman with the top hat. I have a cottage on the edge of my father's land, Dustin replied. It was our shepherd's cottage until he died 2 years ago. Last Lama tides, and my parents gave it to me. Take me to it, the man in the top hat said the man in the top hat, and it did not occur to Dustin to refuse him. The spring was high and bright, and the night was clear. They walked down from the village to the forest beneath, and they walked the whole way past the Thorne family farm, where the gentleman in the top hat was startled by a cow, sleeping in the meadows, which snorted as it dreamed, until they reached Dustin's cottage. It had one room and a fireplace. The stranger nodded. I like this well enough, he said. Come, Dustin Thorne, I'll rent it from you for the next 3 days. What will you give me for it? A golden sovereign, a silver sixpence, a copper penny, and a fresh shining farthing, said the man. Now, a golden sovereign for 2 nights was more than a fair rent in the days when a farm worker might hope to make 15 pounds in a good year. Still, Dustin hesitated. If you're here for the market, he told the tall man, there's miracle and wonders you'll be trading. The tall man nodded. So it'd be miracles and wonders that you be after, is it? He looked around Dustin's one-room cottage again. It began to rain then, a gentle pattering on the thatch above them. Oh, very well, said the tall gentleman, a trifle testily. A miracle, a wonder. Tomorrow you shall attain your heart's desire. Now here is your money. He took it from Dustin's ear with one easy gesture. Dustin touched it to the iron nail of the cottage door, checking for fairy gold. Then he bowed low to the gentleman and walked off into the rain. He tied the money up in his handkerchief. Dustin walked to the cow byre in the pelting rain. He climbed into the hayloft and was soon asleep. He was aware in the night of thunder and lightning, though he did not wake. And then in the small hours of the morning, he was awoken by someone treading awkwardly on his feet. Sorry, said a voice. That is to say, excuse me. Who's that? Who's there? Said Dustin. Just me, said the voice. I'm here for the market. I was sleeping in a hollow tree for the night, but the lightning toppled it, cracked it like an egg, and smashed it like a twig. The rain got down my neck and threatened to get me into my baggage. And there's things in there that must be kept dry as dust. And I kept it safe as houses on all my travelings here, though. It was wet as water, suggested Dustin. Ever so, continued the voice in the darkness. So I was wondering if, he continued, if you would mind me staying here under your roof. As I'm not very big, I'd not disturb you or nothing. Just don't tread on me, sighed Dustin. It was then that a flash of lightning illuminated the byre, and in the light Dustin saw something small and hairy, in the corner wearing a large floppy hat, and then darkness. I hope I'm not disturbing you, said the man with certainty which certainly sounded rather hairy now that Dustin thought about it. You aren't, said Dustin, who was very tired. That's good, said the hairy voice, because I wouldn't want to disturb you. Please, begged Dustin, let me sleep, please. There was a snuffling noise, which was replaced by general snorting. Dustin rolled over in the hay. The person, whoever whatever it was, farted, scratched itself, and began to snore once more. Dustin listened to the rain on the byre roof, and thought about Daisy Hempstock. And in his thoughts they were walking together, and 6 steps beyond them walked a tall man with a top hat, and smaller furry creatures whose face Dustin could not see. They were off to see his heart's desire. He washed his face and walked up to the farmhouse. He put on his very best jacket and his very best shirt and his very best breeches. He scraped the mud from his boots with his pocket knife. Then he walked into the farm kitchen and kissed his mother on the cheek and helped himself to a cottage loaf and a large pat of fresh churned butter. And then, with his money tied up in his fine Sunday cambric handkerchief, he walked up to the village wall and bade good morning to the guard on the gate. Through the gap in the wall he could see colored tents being raised, stalls being erected, colored flags, and people walking back and forth. "We're not to let anyone through until midday," said the guard. Dustin shrugged and went to the pub, where he pondered what he would be buying with his savings. The shiny half-crown he had saved, and his lucky sixpence, with a hole drilled through it on a leather string thong around his neck. And with the additional pocket handkerchief filled with coins he had. For the moment he had quite forgotten had been anything else promised the night before. At the stroke of midday, Dustin strode up to the wall and nervously, as if he were breaking the greatest of taboos, he walked through besides. As he realized, the gentleman in the black silk top hat who had nodded to him. "Ah, my landlord, and how are you today, sir?" "Very well," said Dustin. "Walk with me," said the tall man. "Let us walk together." They walked across the meadow towards the tent. "Have you been here before?" asked the tall man. "I went to the last market 9 years ago. I was only a boy," admitted Dustin. "Well," said his tenant, "remember to be polite and take no gifts. Remember that you are a guest, and now I shall give you the last part of the rent that I owe you. For I swore an oath, and my gifts last a long time. You and your firstborn child, and his or her firstborn child. It's a gift that will last as long as I live." "And what would that be, sir?" "Your heart's desire, remember," said the gentleman in his top hat. "Your heart's desire." Dustin bowed, and they walked on towards the fair. "Eyes, eyes, new eyes for the old," shouted a tiny woman in front of a table covered with bottles and jars, filled with eyes of every kind and color. "Instruments of music from 100 lands. Penny whistles, tump penny hums, 3-penny chorals anthems. Try your luck, step right up. Answer a simple riddle and win a windflower. Everlasting lavender, bluebell cloth. Bottled dreams and shilling a bottle. Coats of night, coats of twilight, coats of dust. Swords of fortune, wands of power, rings of eternity. Cards of graces. Roll up, step this way. Salves and ointments, filters and nostrums." Dustin paused in front of a stall covered with tiny crystal ornaments. He examined the miniature animals, pondering getting one for Daisy Hempstock. He picked up a crystal cat, no bigger than his thumb. Strangely, it blinked at him, and he dropped it. Shocked, it righted itself in midair, and like a real cat, fell on its 4 paws. Then it stalked over to the corner in the stall and began to wash itself. Dustin walked on, and through the thronged market. It was bustling with people, all the stranger who had come to Wall, in the previous weeks were there, and many of the inhabitants of the town of Wall as well. Mr. Bromios had set up a wine tent and was selling wine and pasties to the village folk, who were often tempted by the foods being sold by the folks from beyond the wall. But they had been told by their grandparents, who had got it from their grandparents, that it was deeply, utterly wrong to eat fairy food, to eat fairy fruit, to drink fairy water, and sip fairy wine. Every 9 years, the folks from beyond the wall and over the hill set up their stalls, and for a day and a night, the meadow played host to the fairy market. And there was, for one day and one night in 9 years, commerce between the nations. There were wonders for sale and marvels and miracles. There were things undreamed of and objects unimagined. What need, Dustin wondered, could someone have for a storm-filled eggshell? He jingled his money in his pocket handkerchief and looked for something small and inexpensive with which to amuse Daisy. He heard a gentle chiming in the air, and above the hubbub of the market, and this he walked towards. He passed a stall in which 5 huge men were dancing to the music of a lugubrious hurdy-gurdy being played by a mournful-looking black bear. He passed a stall where a balding man in a brightly colored kimono was smashing china plates and tossing them into a burning bowl, from which colored smoke was pouring all the while calling out to passers-by. The chinkling chimney grew louder. Reaching the stall from which the sound was emanating, he saw that it was deserted. It was festooned with flowers, bluebells, and foxgloves, and harebells and daffodils, but also with violets and lilies, and with tiny crimson dog roses, pale snowdrops, blue forget-me-nots, and a profusion of other flowers Dustin could not name. Each flower was made of glass or crystal, spun or carved that he could not tell. They counterfeited life perfectly, and they chimed and jingled like distant glass bells. "Hello," called Dustin. "Good morrow to you on this market day," said the stall-holder, clambering down from the painted caravan parked behind the stall, and she smiled widely at him with white teeth and a dusky face. "She's one of the folk from beyond the wall." He could tell at once from her eyes and her ears, which were visible beneath her curly black hair. Her eyes were a deep violet, while her ears were the ears of a cat, perhaps gently curved and dusted with a fine, dark fur. She was quite beautiful. Dustin picked up a flower from the stall. "It's very lovely," he said. It was a violet, and it chinkled and sang as he held it, making a noise similar to that produced by wetting a finger, and rubbed it gently around a wine glass. "How much is it?" She shrugged, and a delightful shrug it was. "The cost is never discussed at the outset," she told him. "It might be a great deal more than you could be prepared to pay, and then you would leave and we would both be the poorer for it. Let's discuss the merchandise in a more general way." Dustin paused. It was then that the gentleman with the black silk top hat passed by the stall. "There," murmured Dustin's lodger. "My debt to you is settled, and my rent is paid in full." Dustin shook his head as if to clear it of a dream, and turned back to the young lady. "So where do these flowers come from?" he asked. She smiled knowingly. "On the side of Mount Calamon, a grove of glass flowers grows. The journey there is perilous, and the journey back is more so." "And what of the purpose are they?" "The use and function of these flowers is chiefly decorative and recreational. They bring pleasure. They can be given to a loved one as a token of admiration and affection, and the sound they make is pleasing to the ear. Also, They catch the light most delightfully. She held up a bluebell up to the light, and Dustin could not but observe that the color of the sunlight glittering through the purple crystal was inferior in both hue and shade to that of her eyes. I see, said Dustin. They are also used in certain spells and cantrips, if Sir is a magician. Dustin shook his head. There was, he noticed, something remarkable about the young lady. Even so, they are delightful things, she said, and smiled again. The remarkable thing was a thin silver chain that ran from the young lady's wrist down to her ankle, and into the painted caravan behind her. Dustin remarked upon it. The chain, it binds me to the stall. I am the personal slave of the witch woman who owns the stall. She caught me many years ago, as I played by the waterfall in my father's lands, high in the mountains, luring me on and on in the form of a pretty frog, always but a moment out of my reach, until I left my father's land unwittingly, whereupon she resumed her true shape and popped me into a sack. And you're her slave forever. Not forever, and at that the fairy girl smiled. I gained my freedom on the day the moon loses her daughter. As that occurs in a week when 2 Mondays come together, I await it with patience. And in the meantime, I do as I am bid, and also I dream. Will you buy the flower for me now, young master? My name is Dustin. An honest name it is, too, she said with a teasing grin. Where are your pincers, Master Dustin? Will you catch the devil by the nose? And what is your name? Asked Dustin, blushing a deep red. I no longer have a name. I am a slave, and the name I take away from me, I answer to hey you, or to girl, or to foolish slattern, or to many other imperceptions. Dustin noticed how the silken fabric of her robe pressed itself against her body. He was aware of her elegant curves and of her violet eyes upon him, and he swallowed. Dustin put his hand in his pocket and pulled out his handkerchief. He could no longer look at the woman. He tumbled out his money onto the counter. Take enough for this, he said, picking up a pure white snowdrop from the table. We do not take money at the stall. She pushed the coins back towards him. No, what will you take? And for by now he was quite agitated, and his only mission was to obtain a flower for Daisy Hempstock, to obtain his flower and to depart. For truth to tell, the young lady was making him exceedingly uncomfortable. I could take the color of your hair, she said, for all of your memories. Before you were 3 years of age, I could take the hearing from your left ear, not all of it, just enough that you'd not enjoy music or appreciate the running of a river, or the soughing of the wind. Dustin shook his head. Or a kiss from you. One kiss here on my cheek. That I'll pay with goodwill, said Dustin. And with that, he leaned across the stall amid the twinkling and jingling of the crystal flowers and planted a chaste kiss on her soft cheek. He smelled the scent of her then, intoxicating, magical. It filled his head and his chest and his mind. There now, he said. And she passed him his snowdrop. He took it with a hand that suddenly seemed to him to be huge and clumsy, and all small in every way, perfect, like the hands of the fairy girl. I'll see you here, and I'll see you back here tonight, Dustin Thorne, when the moon goes down. Come here and hoot like a little owl. Can you do that? He nodded and stumbled away from her. He did not need to ask how she knew his surname. she began taking it from him along with certain other things, such as his heart. When he had kissed her, the snowdrop chimed in his hand. "Why, Dustin Thorne," said Daisy Hemstock, when he encountered her by Mr. Bromley's tent, sitting with her family and Dustin's parents eating great brown sausages and drinking porters. "Whatever is the matter?" "I brought you a gift," Dustin muttered, and thrust the chiming snowdrop towards her, and glinted in the afternoon sunlight. She took it from him, puzzled, with fingers still shiny with sausage grease. Impulsive Dustin leaned forward and, in front of his mother, father, and sister, in front of Bridget Comfrey and Mr. Bromley and all, he kissed her on her fair cheek. The outcry was predictable, but Mr. Hemstock, who had not lived on the border of Fairy and the lands beyond for 57 years for nothing, exclaimed, "Hush now, look at his eyes. Can't you see the poor boy is dazed in his wits? Dazed and confused. He's bespelled, I'll wager you. Hoy, Tommy Foster, come here. Take young Dustin Thorne back to the village and keep an eye on him. Let him sleep if he wishes, or talk if it's talk he needs." Tommy walked Dustin out of the market and back to the village of Wall. "There now, Daisy," said her mother, stroking her hair. "He's just a little elf-touched, that's all. No need to take on so." And she put a lace handkerchief from her capacious bosom and dabbed on her daughter's cheek, which had suddenly become covered with tears. Daisy looked up at her and seized the handkerchief and blew her nose upon it, and sniffled into it, and Miss Hemstock observed with certain perplexity that Daisy appeared to be smiling through her tears. "But, mother, Dustin kissed me," said Daisy Hemstock, and she fixed the crystal snowdrop at the front of her bonnet, where it chimed and glistened. After some time spent searching for it, Mr. Hemstock and Dustin's father found the stall where the crystal flowers were being sold, but the wall was being run by an elderly woman, accompanied by an exotic and very beautiful bird, which was chained to his perch by his thin silver chain. There was no reasoning with the old woman, for when they tried to question her about what happened to Dustin, all her talk was of one of her prizes of her collection, given away by a good-for-nothing, and that was what came of ingratitude and of the sad modern times of today's servants. In the empty village, for who'd be in the village during the fairy market, Dustin was taken into the 7th Magpie and given a wooden settle on which to sit. He rested his forehead on his hand and stared off into no one knows where. And from time to time he sighed, huge sighs like the wind. Tommy Foster tried to talk to him, saying, "Now then, old fellow, buck up. That's the ticket. Let's see you smile, eh? Have us something to eat, then, or something to drink. No? My word, you do look queer, Justin, old fellow." But gaining no response at any time, Tommy began to pine after the market himself, and where even now he rubbed his tender jaw. The lovely Bridget was undoubtedly being escorted by some huge and imposing gentleman with exotic clothes and a little monkey that chattered. And having assured himself that his friend would be safe in the empty inn, Dustin walked through the village to the gap in the wall. As Tommy re-entered the market, he observed that the place was a hubbub, a wild place of puppet shows, of jugglers, of dancing animals, of horses for auction, and all kinds of things for sale or barter. Later at twilight, a different kind of people came out. There was a crier who cried news of a modern newspaper prints headlines. "The Master of Stormhold suffers a mysterious malady. The Hill of Fire has moved to the fastness of Dane. The Squire of Garamond, only heir, is transformed into a guinea pig Wigan." And would for a coin expand on further on these stories. The sun set and a huge spring moon appeared, high already in the heavens. A chill breeze blew. Now the traders retreated into their tents, and the visitors to the market found themselves whispered at, invited to partake in numerous wonders, each available for a price. And as the moon came low on the horizon, Dustin Thorne walked quietly down the cobbled streets of the village of Wall. He passed many a merrymaker, visitor, or foreigner, although few of them observed him as he walked. He slipped through the gap in the wall. Thick it was, the wall, and Dustin found himself wandering, as his father had before him. What would happen were he to walk along the top of it? Through the gap into the meadow, and that night, for the first time in his life, Dustin entertained the thoughts of continuing on through the meadow, crossing the stream, and vanishing into the trees on its far side. He entertained these thoughts awkwardly, as the man entertains unexpected guests. Then, as he reached his objective, he pushed these thoughts away, as the man monopolized to his guests, and as the man apologizes to his guests and leaves them, muttering something about his prior engagements. The moon was setting. Dustin had raised his hand to his mouth and hooted. There was no response, and the sky above was a deep color. Blue, perhaps, or purple, not black. Sprinkled with stars more than the mind could hold. He hooted once more. That, she said, severely in the ear, is nothing like a little owl. A snowy owl it could be, a barn owl. Even if my ears were stopped up with twigs, perhaps, I imagine it as an eagle owl, but not a little owl. Dustin shrugged and grinned a little foolishly. The fairy woman sat beside him. She intoxicated him. He was breathing her, sensing her through his pores of his skin. She leaned close to him. Do you think you are under my spell, pretty Dustin? I don't know. She laughed, and the sound was clear, real bubbling over rocks and stones. You are under no spell, pretty boy, pretty boy. She lay in the grass, stared up at the sky. Your stars, she asked. What are they like? Dustin laid beside her in the cool grass and stared up at the sky. There was a certainty, something odd about the stars. Perhaps there was more color in them, for they glittered like tiny gems. Perhaps there was something about the number of tiny stars, the constellations. Something was strange and wonderful about the stars. But then they lay back to back, staring up at the sky. What do you want from life? Asked the fairy lass. I don't know, he admitted. You, I think. I want my freedom, she said. Dustin reached down to the silver chain that ran from her wrist to her ankle and off a ways into the grass. He tugged on it, and it was stronger than it looked. It was fashioned of cat's breath and fish scales and moonlight mixed in with the silver, she told him. Unbreakable until the terms of the spell are concluded. Oh, he moved back onto the grass. I should not mind it, for it is a long chain. But the knowledge of it irks me, and I miss my father's lands, and the witch woman is not the best of mistresses. And she was quiet. Dustin leaned over towards her and reached a hand up to her face. Something wet and hot splashed against his hands. Why are you crying? She said nothing. Dustin pulled her towards him, wiping ineffectually at her face with his big hand, and then he leaned into her sobbing face, attentively uncertain of whether or not he was doing the correct thing given the circumstances. He kissed her, full upon her burning lips. There was a moment of hesitation, and then her mouth opened against his, and her tongue slid into his mouth, and he was under the strange stars, utterly and irrevocably lost. He had kissed her before, with the girls of the village. He had kissed before with the girls of the village, but he had gone no farther. His hands felt the small of her breast through the silk of her dress, and touched the hard nubs of her nipples. She clung to him hard, as if she were drowning, fumbling with his shirt, with his breeches. She was so small. He was scared he would hurt her and break her. He did not. She wriggled and writhed beneath him, gasping, kicking, and guiding him with her hand. She placed a 100 burning kisses on his face and chest, and then she was above him, straddling him, gasping and laughing, sweating and slippery as a minnow, and he was arching and pushing and exulting, his head full of her and only her, and he had known her name, he would have called it out aloud. And at the end he would have pulled out, but she held him inside her, wrapped her legs around him, and pushed against him, so hard that he felt the two of them occupied the same place in the universe. As if for one purpose, one powerful, engulfing moment, they were the same person, giving and receiving, as the stars faded in the pre-dawn sky. They laid side by side. The fairy woman adjusted her silk robe, and was once more decorously covered. Dustin pulled his bridges back up with regret. He squeezed her small hand in his. The sweat dried on his skin, and he felt chilled and lonely. He could see her now, as the sky lightened into the dawn. Gray around them, animals were stirring. Horses stamped. Birds began walking to sing the dawn in, and here and there across the market meadow, those in the tents were beginning to rise and move. "Now get along with you," she said softly. And she looked at him, half regretfully, with eyes as violet as the serious clouds in the high in the dawn sky. And she kissed him gently on the mouth, lips that tasted of crushed blackberries. And then she stood up and walked back into the gypsy's caravan behind the stall. Dazed and alone, Dustin walked through the market, feeling a great deal older than his 18 years. He returned to the cow byre, took off his boots, and slept until he woke, when the sun was high in the sky. On the following day, the market finished, although Dustin did not return to it, and the foreigners left the village, and life in Wall returned to normal, which was perhaps slightly less normal than life in most villages, particularly when the wind was in the wrong direction, but was, all things considered, normal enough. 2 weeks after the market, Tommy Forrester proposed marriage to Bridget Comfrey, and she accepted. And the week after that, Mrs. Hemstock came to visit Mrs. Thorne of a morning. And Mrs. Hemstock came to visit Mrs. Thorne of a morning. They took tea in the parlor. "It's a blessing about the Forrester boy," said Mrs. Hemstock. "That it is," said Miss Thorne. "Have the nurse going, my dear. I expect your Daisy shall be a bridesmaid." "I trust she shall be," said Mrs. Hemstock, "if she could live so long." Mrs. Thorne looked up in alarm. "Why, she is not ill, Mrs. Hemstock. Say it is not so." "She does not eat, Mrs. Thorne. She wastes away. She drinks a little water from time to time." "Oh, my!" Mrs. Hemstock went on. "Last night I finally discovered the cause of it. It is your Dustin." "Dustin? He has not." Miss Thorne raised one hand to her mouth. "Oh, no," Mrs. Hemstock said hastily, shaking her head and pursing her lips. "Nothing like that. He has ignored her. She has not seen him for days and days. She had taken it into her head that he no longer cares for her, and all she does is hold the snowdrop he gave her, and she sobs and sobs and sobs. Mrs. Thorne measured out more tea from the jar into the pot, added hot water. To tell the truth, she admitted, we're a little concerned about Dustin. Thorny me, he's been mooning. That's the only word for it. His work isn't getting done. Thorny was saying that he needs some settling down, that boy. If he'd but settled down, why, Thorny was saying, settle all the westward meadow on the land. Mrs. Hemstock nodded slowly. Mr. Hemstock would certainly not be averse to seeing our Daisy happy. Certainly he'd settle a flock of our sheep on the girl. The Hemstock sheep were notoriously the finest for miles around, shaggy, coated, and intelligent, for sheep, with curling horns and sharp hooves. Mrs. Hemstock and Mrs. Thorne sipped their tea, and so it was settled. Dustin Thorne was married in June to Daisy Hemstock, and if the groom seemed a little distracted, well, the bride was as glowing and lovely as ever any bride had been. Behind them, their father discussed the plans for the farmhouse. They would build for their newlyweds in the western meadow. Their mother agreed how lovely Daisy looked, and what a pity it was that Dustin had stopped Daisy from wearing the snowdrop he had bought for her at the market at the end of April, in her wedding dress. And there we will leave it, in a falling flurry of rose petals and scarlets and yellows and pink and white. Or almost. They lived in Dustin's cottage while their little farmhouses erected. They were certainly happy enough, and the day-to-day business of raising sheep and herding sheep and shearing them and nursing them slowly took the faraway look from Dustin's eye. The first autumn came, then winter. It was at the end of February, in lambing season, when the world was cold and a bitter wind howled. Down the moors and through the leafless forests, when icy rain fell from the leaden sky in continual drizzling showers. At 6 in the evening, after the sun had set and the sky was dark, that a wicker basket was pushed through the space in the wall. The guard on each side of the gap at first did not notice the basket. They were facing the wrong way, after all, and it was dark and wet, and they were busy stamping the grounds, and staring gloomily and longingly at the lights of the village. And then a high, keening wail began. It was then that they looked down and saw the basket at their feet. There was a bundle in the basket, a bundle of oiled silk and woolen blankets, from the top of which protruded a red, bawling face, with screwed-up little eyes, a mouth open and vocal and hungry. And there was attached to the baby blanket with a silver pin and a scrap of parchment upon which was written, in an elegant, if slightly archaic handwriting, the following words: Tristan Thorne. So ends Chapter 1. If you want to read more of Stardust by Neil Gaiman, come down to the Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. We'll be happy to have you and find any books. Thank you, and have a great day. Goodbye.